On today's Locked On Giants podcast, we continue our look at the New York Giants' 2024 regular season opponents by heading to the NFC East. The Dallas Cowboys didn't do much in the offseason, so does that mean the Giants might have closed the gap with their division rival? We discuss that and more with Locked On Cowboys co-host Landon McCool. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for Giants on SI. Find our written work at si.com/NFL/Giants. And welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, we continue our look at the New York Giants 2024 regular season opponents. And we are back in the NFC East, and we are talking with one of the co-hosts of Locked On Cowboys. He's Landon McCool. The Cowboys, lately, they've had the Giants number. I'm not sure why that is, but they have had the Giants number. But Landon's here to kind of update us on all things Cowboys, the new personnel, what the Cowboys did, what they didn't do. And the Cowboys are pretty interesting, Landon. They had a pretty interesting offseason, or maybe lack of. Maybe that's the best word to describe it.
Yeah, honestly, you were talking about whatever new personnel, and I thought you were breaking news to me, because there's not a lot of new personnel to speak of as it stands right now. I mean, the Cowboys have basically been spending most of their offseason getting ready for the draft that we just had, and prepping for that, and have really, and this is a team that has traditionally sat on their hands early in free agency, but they have really outdone themselves this year in that sense, where they not only sat out the first 2 weeks of free agency, they basically sat out free agency. So yeah, I think, for the most part, the Cowboys are having an interesting offseason. I do agree there, but they're doing so without doing very much. And really, if anything, it's more their inaction that is this speaking louder than any specific actions that they've done this offseason.
Does that concern you, though? I mean, what message is that sending?
No, I mean, yeah, I think, I've been pretty critical of the Cowboys in the sense that I don't feel like their organizational timeline is lining up, right? Like you hear, first of all, I mean, I'm sure Giants fans do this anyways, but for most Cowboys fans, no one should really be listening to what Jerry Jones is saying to the media, because obviously it's a lot of chum and it's a lot of trying to get people talking about the Cowboys. But I think, he obviously raised a bunch of eyebrows by, saying that he was going to go all in with the team this year. And obviously there has been zero indication of any of that. This to me seems more and more like a season in which the Cowboys are trying to get their cap in order for future seasons. They're trying to get some organization in their finances. They're trying to reset the table at a couple things. They're clearly trying to sign 3 of the most expensive players that they are going to sign in the next 5 or 6 years, all in one offseason. And so I think, it's a lot of hurry up and wait, see how the contract negotiations are going in certain situations, kind of keeping their powder dry. But there isn't a lot of anything else going on. And yes, it is concerning because, Dak Prescott's on like he's one of those guys that needs to get paid. He's on one-year deal. There's no franchise tag. There's no leverage for the Cowboys beyond that. Mike McCarthy his deal is up at the end of the year. And so, in one hand, you've had a team that's won 12 games in the last 3 seasons, which is really incredible. But on the other hand, you've had a team that's had very early exits from the playoffs, much to the chagrin of Cowboys fans. And those two competing, ideas have made for a really complicated offseason, because it's like, do you want to get back in bed with this situation that seemingly has been good, but not great yet? Or is it time to kind of, reset the table and try something new here? It feels like the Cowboys haven't fallen on either side of that. And it feels like they need to make a decision one way or another and stop trying to kind of balance both, because that's going to ultimately lead us right back to a disappointing exit in the playoffs probably again.
Now, before we get into the players, Landon, I want to talk about the head coach situation, because this is kind of interesting from where I stand on the outside looking in. They lost Dan Quinn, went to Washington. They hired Mike Zimmer, a guy who has had head coaching experience. Mike McCarthy is a lame duck coach. Do you kind of get the feeling that Jerry Jones might have a quick hook with Mike McCarthy if this team gets off to a slow start, or, just doesn't roll over teams?
I mean, I think that certainly is part of it. Yeah. And I think that's, I think that's a feature that Jerry likes to have, in-house most of the time. But I also think that Jerry is notoriously, he's got a reputation for like that kind of move, but if anything, he's the opposite, right? Like the last time he probably fired someone too soon was Chan Gailey. And when, he won 10 games and they went to the playoffs and didn't do well. And I think, he pulled the trigger, and he said since then that he's really regretted pulling the trigger so quickly on Chan back then. But I would say since then, that has not been an issue with him. Like, he is not, I mean, the last coach that he fired in season was, I think, Wade Phillips, if I'm not mistaken. And that was pre Jason Garrett, but that took, mountains to be moved for Jerry to kind of finally come to that decision. I do think that Jerry tends to like to have an out, and likes to have something in-house so that if something does happen, that he can change horses midstream. But I don't think that this is something that he is, really interesting in wanting to do. I think if anything, it's more of a situation that if his hand is forced, he has no other options, that, it's there if he needs it. I'm interested in the Zimmer situation overall, because I wonder like how much of a long-term situation this is, even if McCarthy gets fired and Zimmer doesn't become the head coach. Like, is Zimmer interested in staying on as defensive coordinator if the Cowboys went out and hired a different head coach next year? That's where I'm really interested, because obviously we know Zimmer would be, I'm sure has some interest in being a head coach again. What I guess I'm interested in is he interested in sticking in the DC role for a little while? Is he going to enjoy that a little bit, kind of not having that entire team responsibility? As the Cowboys have experienced, some of these former head coaches that were coordinators with them, they tend to like it. So I wonder if he doesn't stick around in that spot for a little while, even if McCarthy's gone.
How is the defense varied with Zimmer running it? I know it's early yet, but how much of a major change or minor change is there between what Zimmer's running versus what Quinn ran?
There's a pretty big difference. I mean, I think, when we talk about differences in defenses, it's not like it was how we discussed 20 years ago, right? Like, before it was like, oh, is it a 4-3 or a 3-4? Where, that doesn't really matter anymore. And teams are playing so many varied fronts. It's really about what you're doing in the pass game and coverages and how you're attacking the quarterback. And so in that sense, things are pretty different. I think that there will be different coverages. Obviously with Dan Quinn, he was mostly a cover 1, cover 3 team. They mixed some coverages in there. They did some interesting match stuff, but for the most part, they played a ton of man coverage, to be honest. And then when they didn't play man coverage, they were playing cover 3. And then, they had a lot of interesting alignment stuff. The personnel usage was clearly one thing that Dan Quinn was super interested in, kind of mixing things up and getting different groups of guys out there and playing to players' strengths. I mean, we were playing with a 220-pound linebacker for most of the season last year, who was a former safety. That stuff is not going to fly with Zimmer so much. Like, he's not going to play with undersized personnel at positions like linebacker. And I think the other position that is likely to see the most change besides linebacker is defensive tackle, because Quinn comes from a situation where he wants to get everyone upfield immediately. All four of the down defensive linemen attacking the quarterback, at full speed, play the run on the way to the quarterback. And Zimmer is very much more about earning the right to rush the passer by stopping the run on early downs, having a little bit bigger bodies inside to try to stop the run, to try to kind of limit the run situations early, and then creating third down situations in which he can deploy pressure packages, blitzes, twist, and that sort of thing, which is, again, that's also pretty different from Quinn. Quinn was not necessarily a huge blitz. I mean, he certainly would, but he would prefer to drop 7 and have 4 attacking the quarterback. So I would say that they are pretty different as far as like philosophy goes. But I would also say that I think that Zimmer is going to be able to work with the personnel that's here, because, I mean, it's like we're talking about Micah Parsons and Trayvon Diggs, and like, these are good players, so they, and I think the players that are at positions that you worry about the transition, right? Like I would worry about defensive backs, right? Because it's just such a different coverage scheme than what you're talking about. A defensive line, it's go and get the quarterback. A lot of these guys just have to deal with. And the ones who don't, like DeMarcus Lawrence knows how to play the run. But the defensive backs is where you would normally worry about this. And I think that that's where the Cowboys are lucky, because guys like Trayvon Diggs went to Alabama. They have very similar coverage system than what Zimmer runs. Deron Bland is an off-man coverage guy, so he's going to fit in well. Jordan Lewis is a veteran, so he's played in a bunch of different systems. So I do think there is some learning curve that's going to happen in this transition. But I don't think it's going to be severe, even though the defense may seem very different than what Dan Quinn was running when he left.
All right, Giant fans, you are listening to the Locked On Giants podcast. We are running down everything we need to know about the Dallas Cowboys, who, of course, are in the NFC East with the New York Giants. They faced them twice this year. Landon McCool is our special guest. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Cowboys offense and some of the head-scratching moves that they made on the offense. Don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't even sporting like I want them to be. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up any bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and my special guest is Landon McCool. He's one half of the dynamic duo over at Locked On Cowboys. He's their show like mine. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. We're usually 5 days a week, but now that we're in the dead period of the NFL, some of us are going 3 days, some of us are doing 4, but still check them out. They do a great job over there on Locked On Cowboys. And Landon, please try and make some sense out of this for me. What did the Cowboys do on offense? And specifically, I'm talking about the running game. They had Tony Pollard, who they kept over Zeke Elliott. Okay, I kind of get that. Pollard walked away. Zeke is back. What exactly are they doing on offense? And not to mention the offensive line, which we haven't even talked about, but that too.
Well, I think that, I think what they're trying to do is build the run game through the offensive line, and I think, Tony Pollard was a situation where he was probably going to take more money than the Cowboys were comfortable paying at this point, which, ended up mostly being true. It seems like, though he didn't walk away for an enormous contract. Bringing back Zeke was a head scratcher in a lot of ways, though. I think that there is a misconception nationally on what his role is going to be. This is not, even if Jerry says that it implies that it is, or, this is not going to be a situation where I think Zeke is the lead back. I think it's probably going to be Rico Dowdle, who the Cowboys really like a lot. And I think showed the Cowboys a lot last year. So, and I think that a lot of folks, maybe aren't fully aware of what a good player Rico is. So I think that that's a lot of what the Cowboys are banking on. But I also think that the Cowboys may not be done here. That they're running back is 100% one of those positions that you can find talent, like a starter level talent, off the street almost at any point in the season, right? And especially once you start talking about cut down days, or at the end of training camp, that's when you can definitely see another move being made. I wouldn't be shocked if the Cowboys maybe even made a little trade or something. I think what they're missing in the room, really more than anything, is just a little bit more juice, right? And maybe that can be supplemented by the rise of Deuce Vaughn, who was a pick for the Cowboys last year. Did not look ready for prime time last year, but that's not shocking. But he did have some good stuff as a pass catcher, as a screen guy. But he's clearly, to say that he's undersized is a very kind thing to say, because he's obviously the smallest player probably in the NFL, or at least definitely the smallest running back. So the Cowboys have I think, worked this offseason to try to figure out him a little bit of a different role there. And so the running back room is, I think it's a work in progress, to say the least. I think that they have a collection of guys that they like. But I agree that it's, Marcus and I talked about it on the show earlier today. I think Sycamore over at the all, I can't remember where he put the list up, but he did a list of all 32 running back rooms. And Trevor had the Cowboys at 32. And I don't disagree with them. I do think that it's possible to have, better production than how do I say this? I think it's able to produce production at a higher rate than maybe the talent in your running back room would dictate. Because I don't think that running production is created solely by the running backs. But I also think that this is a running back room that can use improvement. There's no doubt about it. And certainly isn't as talented as it was with Tony Pollard in it last season.
How much of a distraction do you think the fact that Dak Prescott doesn't have a contract? There's some question as to whether or not he'll be back here. Are they maybe looking at Shedeur Sanders, who I think, the Cowboys are listed as one of his maybe desired teams? I mean, what's the feeling for that? Because, look, it sends a message to the locker room when you start playing around with your big name guys. So I got to imagine that maybe there's some, I don't know, uncertainty or unsettled feelings about that.
Maybe, it's that it feels like that the Cowboys are sort of immune to a little bit of that. And I think this is the kind of, when we talk about double-edged swords, we're usually bringing up the negative aspect. The negative aspect with the Cowboys' constant attention is very obvious, right? It's like it's constant. They're constantly under microscope. It makes even small things get blown up into huge things, and it can be problematic for bulletin board material, for motivational reasons, for negotiating through the media, all those stuff. But the double-sided, the other side of that sword in a positive way is that it does kind of immunize them from a lot of this nonsense. They get all this nonsense all the time. It's constant with the, well, what do you think about this guy's contract? Or do you think this guy's going to get signed? And so, they've been through the Dak contract thing before, like, 3 or 4 years ago. So I think that it's a topic for all of us to discuss all the time. And we do, and everyone, mentions it and brings it up. But, Dak's still going to, I don't know if you saw this today, but he was at the tight end meeting. They have the gathering of tight ends, like
Tight End University.
Tight End U. Thank you. And he was out there as the quarterback throwing them footballs. And he takes his group out and they go on a specific, trip of just their skill players, and just have a bonding experience. I think as long as Dak is doing the things that, you would want your quarterback to do to kind of bond with his offensive players, and here's the other thing too. it's always a story until the contracts get signed and then everyone's happy, and it's like you're mad. I'm so happy that I got this money. And that's usually how these storylines go. So I imagine things will be contentious, in some way, or feel contentious all the way up until the day that we all log on to our social media and see the announcement that Dak Prescott has been made the highest paid player in the NFL history for that week. And so I think, it's the thing that's really complicated the issue more than anything is that it's 3 players, and really really we should narrow it down to 2 because Micah Parsons isn't quite part of this conversation yet, but CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott are probably the highest and maybe the second highest paid player you're going to have on your team, and so trying to work out those deals and fit them underneath the cap and get a good deal, it's tough. And I do think that the Cowboys have done a good job of not being distracted by it. But once you start missing time, once things start affecting practice schedules, like if CD were to hold out from training camp or something like that, then I would start becoming worried about it, because then it becomes something that, is out of the ordinary. I think we could have all set our watch to CD not showing up at minicamp, or, Micah not showing up to the first week of OTAs. Or I think that those are things that weren't totally surprising.
All right, Giant fans, stay tuned. We're going to talk more about the Dallas Cowboys, including some of the newcomers we need to be aware of and how this team is starting to match up against the Giants. Don't go anywhere. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Chena, and my guest today is Landon McCool, one half of the Locked On Cowboys duo, along with Marcus Mosher. And we are talking Dallas Cowboys, who, of course, are on the Giants schedule. 2 Thursday night games. Interesting. I think that's like the first time.
That is interesting. Yeah. And the Cowboys actually play Washington like right before that Thursday night. So we actually have like for the first time, I think 10 years, a short week between 2 division rivals, which is there's some really interesting stuff in the schedule this season.
For sure. Landon, when you look at the Cowboys and how they're built currently, and based on what you know about the Giants, where do you see kind of the areas where you feel like you still need some answers to some questions?
Well, there's definitely a lot of questions to be answered on the offensive line right now. I mean, I think that the Cowboys have a lot of good, solutions there. And I think we know a lot of these answers, but obviously, with rookies, you still got to get a lot of that stuff confirmed. So, the Cowboys are likely to be starting. They're definitely going to be having 2 new starters on their offensive line. They're likely to be starting 2 rookies on the offensive line at center and at left tackle. Tyler Guyton is, I think, the one who's very clearly going to be your starter at left tackle. The Cowboys don't have much in the way of other options there. I mean, I think Chuma Edoga is a very solid backup, but he is clearly a backup and not someone that you want out there for a 17-game schedule. So Tyler Guyton obviously was the guy that they're bringing in to kind of look at the starter left tackle. The question is like how quickly and up to speed he can get to being even just not a problem, on the left side as a rookie left tackle in the NFL. And again, the Cowboys, as the Giants are as well, we are all playing the AFC South this year. I'm sorry, the AFC East this year. And so, we've got I'm sorry again. The AFC North. I'm sorry, North. Which as everyone knows, except for me, who was just screwing that up. The pass rush is absolutely terrifying. Right, the Cowboys' first game of this year is against the Cleveland Browns, and so the Cowboys' starting left tackle rookie is going to be facing Myles Garrett, his first game in the NFL. So yeah, the Cowboys are going to have to learn very quickly to deal with these rookies. And the other one, I'm sorry, I didn't mention was Cooper Beebe, who was from Kansas State, was our 3rd round pick. I think he has the inside track to be the starter at center. I tend to think that he is a guy that maybe quicker than Tyler Guyton could surpass the level of play that they got from the Cowboys, at that point last year from center. I like Tyler Biadasz a lot. He was a Pro Bowler, but I felt like there was a missing element of power to his game. And I think that that's what Cooper Beebe is going to provide. The Cowboys just really wanted to kind of, I know we talked about the running back room, but despite that, the Cowboys really did want to make a commitment to running the football better. Because even if you look at what happened last year with the personnel they had with Tyron Smith, with Tony Pollard, they really struggled to run the football at the end of the year, and it really caused them problems. So I think that the Cowboys made a strong commitment on both sides of the ball to not just be pass reliant in defense and in offense. So what that meant is bringing Zimmer in on the defensive side to kind of buff up the run defense a little bit while maintaining the pass rush. And what that meant on the offensive side is rearranging the onus of where they're getting the movement on the football when they're running the ball. And that's obviously the offensive line. We talked about the running back situation. Likely they're going to, hopefully move, have a couple more moves there to kind of clean up that room. But outside of that, I think, the offensive line is really the area, especially when you think about the Giants, they obviously added Burns. They've already got Dexter Lawrence. They've already got Thibodeau and Ojulari and guys that are, good depth at the defensive line across the board at defensive tackle and at defensive end. So that's the real area where I think when we're going to be talking these Wednesday nights before the game, that I think that that's where a lot of the focus is going to be, is how are the Cowboys going to be able to match up blocking that group, and if they do, then I think that they probably will have success. But I think that is definitely going to be a major concern both times the Cowboys play the Giants.
Landon, who are some of the players on the Cowboys that really aren't getting enough love, but who are kind of standing out, looking like they could be major contributors? I know you mentioned a few earlier, but who are some other ones that maybe we should keep an eye on as the summer cranks on?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of folks have been outside of Dallas have been talking about the wide receiver position and that the Cowboys didn't do a lot to add bodies there. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they feel really good about some of the people that they have, a little bit further on. And I'll talk about a couple of those guys. Kevontae Turpin is obviously a guy that I think NFC East fans are aware of at this point. He came in as a return specialist from the UFL, I think 2 seasons ago. And he's made quite a splash as a returner. He's dangerous with the ball in his hands, but as the years have gone on, he's become even more a part of the passing offense. And I would expect his role to take even a further step this year. So he's a speed guy, dangerous with the ball in his hands. The Cowboys, have a couple other guys. Jalen Brooks, who was a late 7th round pick for the Cowboys in 2023. Cowboys didn't have a lot of expectations for this guy coming into the season. They already had a lot of depth. They thought he would be a future piece, but he just kept on. Marcus and I talk about, this is a Sigmund Bloom line, that there was the drum beat, right? Like hearing the person's name over and over again through training camp. That's when you know that a player has made it, right? Is consistency. And Jalen Brooks was one of these guys who was a rookie whose name you just kept on hearing over and over again, day in and day out of camp. And then what happens? We get to the regular season. He gets into the regular season. He has a couple of big catches. He has, including one really great highlight one where the ball bounced off the defender and he caught it and grabbed it and ran upfield for another 10 or 15 yards. He proved himself to be a great blocker. So he's a guy that I feel like, more than met the expectation as a rookie. And whenever you see guys like that get a little bit of experience as a rookie, you always look out for them their second year, because they take that experience, really internalize it, and then kind of grow from it. And the last guy I'll point out, again, from the wide receiver position, is Jalen Tolbert, who is the true third wide receiver of this group. Jalen is a guy that was a 3rd round wide receiver 2 years ago, came from a small school, South Alabama. Was new to the game, was mostly a baseball player in high school, was an incredible athlete. He's kind of a bigger guy, more of an X receiver than really almost anybody else on this team outside of CD, but CD operates in the slot. And that's really a position that the Cowboys have needed, I think, for a little bit, is another guy to operate on the outside, to draw coverage away, to be able to function as an X receiver in this offense. And Tolbert is a guy that We were all waiting a little bit for him to break out last year, and I think he had a pretty decent season, but not quite what we were expecting. But now the runway has basically been cleared off for him. Gallup is gone. He's going to get all those targets, and he has been at Dak's hip this and the last offseason the entire time. So I'm looking for a big time jump from Jalen Tolbert this season in comparison to the last 2 seasons for him.
Okay, final question for you, Landon. What is the X factor in this Giants Cowboys series this year? The player, the unit, the element. What's going to decide it either way?
Yeah, I mean, I really do think are the Cowboys going to be able to protect Dak Prescott? We kind of mentioned it before, but I do really think that a lot of that is going to look. I mean, I'm going to be nice here, but Dak Prescott has had a pretty decent record, I would say, against the Giants. In fact, I can't remember if he's lost to the Giants since his rookie season or not. It's been a very long time since he's lost to the Giants. So I would say, look, you kind of have to go to the historical precedent here. If the Cowboys are able to keep Dak off the ground and CeeDee Lamb is in the game, it's a hard combination for teams to stop. But I think that's a big if. Like we said, rookie left tackle, rookie center, and look, that rookie center. I feel great about Cooper Beebe, but I don't feel great about any center against Dexter Lawrence. So. I think that there is definitely a lot of hay for this Giants defense to be made in a way that I don't know that they have had the opportunity against the Cowboys previously. I think that this defensive line, the Giants defensive line, looks a little bit scarier than it has in previous years. And the Cowboys offensive line is obviously in a year of very serious transition. So I think if there's any year in which this, defensive line should have an opportunity to really get after Dak Prescott in a way that they hadn't previously, it should be this one.
All right. Well, we will find out soon enough. 2 Thursday games. Again, that is just so wild.
Weird. Just wild.
That is really wild. So, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. I want to thank Landon McCool for coming on to give us a lowdown on the Cowboys. Let's hope that the Giants finally get the better of the Cowboys this year. Please, I'm sick of losing to the Cowboys. But seriously, I mean, Landon and Marcus, they're really good. When it comes to Cowboys, anything you need to know, those are the guys you want to hit up and listen to. So, Landon, thank you. Giant fans, thank you for tuning in. Keep it here as we continue to bring you all things Giants, including a look at the New York Giants 2024 regular season opponents. We will catch you again later, Giant fans.